Good morning. Welcome to the First Unitarian Church of Hamilton, whether you're here in the sanctuary or watching online. For those in the sanctuary, please turn off your cell phones unless you're using them with our hearing loop system. My name is Bill Johnston. My pronouns are he, him. I'm the co-chair of this congregation's affordable housing team, and today I'm your service leader. It takes many people to create a Sunday worship service, and we are grateful to Jeffrey Pollock on piano, the tech team of Claire Miles and Chase Tapley, ushers Elizabeth Beckett and Morgan Mallory, greeters Rita Mubarak and Julia Rock, worship assistants Susan and Ian Johnstone, and behind-the-scenes assistants from Reverend Danny, Rachel Derry, and Doreen Knoll. And today we'll have sermonettes from the members of the affordable housing team, Joan MacNeil, Thomas Jones, Paula Bourner, Jennie Koops, and me. We have 4 oral announcements this morning. Our monthly potluck and games night is this coming Friday, the 29th of November, at 6 to 9 p.m. Please bring your favorite nut-free dish and bring some games to join in the fun and fellowship. Everyone is welcome, all ages. The Boreal concert is on Saturday, December 7th. It's going to be a fabulous evening of music with both the Boreal Trio and our choir. You can buy your tickets outside for $25 today or next Sunday, or you can buy them online through Eventbrite. They also need about 15 volunteers to make this event a success. There's a volunteer sheet out there when you're buying your ticket, or if you're not buying a ticket. Today we encourage you to stay after the service for a question and answer and conversation with the housing team. There'll be a light snack as well. And we also handed out some cards to you, and we encourage you to add your name to this important housing campaign. The organizers and the housing team, I think, would emphasize that this is kind of a minimal ask of the federal and provincial governments. For more information about these and other announcements, check on our website or check on the weekly emails. Whoever you are, whatever your circumstances, today you are one of us and you are welcome here. We extend a special welcome today. I mean, you're all special, but a special welcome to Melanee McAulay from Sacajawea and Lisa and Faith from Sacajawea. Our congregational mission includes our commitment to nurture one another, to serve the community, and to inspire action that heals the world. I invite the members of the housing team to come up and light our chalice as I read our chalice lighting words. And let me introduce them, Thomas Jones, Jennie Koops, and Joan MacNeil. Paula Bourner is also a member of the team, but is not present today. In many cultures and faiths, the symbol of the flame is sacred. It symbolizes, for instance, the presence of God in Judaism, or the Holy Spirit in Christianity. It appears as the 3 fires in the logo of the Mississaugas of the Credit First Nations, and in the role of the Onondagas as the fire keepers for the council meetings of the Haudenosaunee Confederacy. It symbolizes the warmth of the hearth at the center of a home. And for Unitarians, this symbol of the chalice and flame was first adopted as a beacon of freedom as members of the Unitarian Service Committee worked to rescue people from the Nazi terror before and during the Second World War. So we will light this flame to signify the light of freedom and hope as we enter into a time of celebration of all that is best in our faith tradition and in humankind. Please join me in our chalice lighting words on the screen behind you, I think. May this flame be our light of friendship and love. Thank you. Today is our 9th annual National Housing Day service. National Housing Day marks the anniversary of a declaration in 1998 by Canada's big city mayors that homelessness had become a national emergency. They wanted a response as at least significant as there had been to the ice storm earlier that decade. Social assistance cuts, the end of funding for new affordable and co-op housing, and the deinstitutionalization of thousands of mental health patients had, since the early 1980s, created our modern homelessness crisis, men, women, and whole families. The homelessness crisis is still every bit as much an emergency as it was then, perhaps more so. And it's just the tip of the iceberg of an affordability crisis that has tens of thousands of Hamiltonian households paying too much for housing or at risk of losing their housing. With our land acknowledgement, we recognize that Hamilton sits on the territories of the Erie, Neutral, Huron-Wendat, Haudenosaunee, and Mississaugas. This area is covered by the 1701 Dish with One Spoon Wampum Belt Agreement, an agreement between the Haudenosaunee and Anishinaabe to share and care for the resources of the area around the Great Lakes. The agreement followed the pattern of the two-row Wampum Belt treaties between the Haudenosaunee and the Dutch and then the British, the two rows indicating respect for parallel, non-interfering sovereignties in a relationship of mutual respect. Such agreements have way too often been violated. It was 100 years ago this fall, on October 7th, 1924, that the federal government, using the RCMP, ousted the traditional Confederacy Council of the Six Nations from their council house at Oswego. The council insisted, and still insists, that it had sovereign authority over Six Nations lands along the Grand River, in keeping with those past treaties. Today, something like 99% of Canada has been taken from Indigenous peoples. A greater proportion of Indigenous people experience homelessness than non-Indigenous people, and then they face other challenges with housing, including overcrowding. We have much to learn about what has been done in our name. We commit to that learning and to the work of listening and relationship building. That is the only path toward repairing the damage done. Please stand, if you're willing and able, for our first hymn, Blue Boat Home, number 1064 in the Singing the Journey hymnal. Our story for all ages this morning will be read by Pat Dickinson.
Story. I'm pleased to be reading the story this morning. It's called Alejandria Fights Back by Leticia Hernandez Linares, as selected and adapted by Bill Johnston. Welcome to Parkwood. I'm Alejandria, and this is my home. Home isn't just our apartment, it's the whole neighborhood. Mommy and my grandmother Tita are here from Nicaragua, and I was born right here. I like to draw the people and places in our neighborhood. Sometimes Mr. Amir, the grocer, even posts my pictures in his store. Outside the grocery store, I hear someone shout, "Ali!" It's my best friend, Edgar. He was visiting his grandma in Guatemala, and it feels like he's been gone forever. What did I miss, Edgar asks. I launch into the story of how we almost lost our home. It was the first day of summer vacation, and I was walking with Tita. She stopped to chat with Ms. Beatrice. "Look at this," Tita said. "Another for sale sign." Miss Beatrice nodded. "There is a new one every other day." The next day, I walked over to Julian's apartment and saw boxes in the living room. "Hey, Julian, what's up?" He frowned. "We're moving. My dad said the landlord raised the rent, so we can't stay here anymore. It's too expensive." I felt badly for Julian, and I wondered, could they do the same to us? That night, I went to show Mommy my latest drawing. I found her in the kitchen staring at some mail. She seemed upset, like she was having a bad dream. Later, while Mommy was getting ready for work, I found the piece of paper she had been reading, and in the jumble of words, a few jumped out. Rent, increase, 30 days, eviction. Hot tears filled my eyes. "Mommy, does this mean we have to move too?" "We'll do what we have to do to survive," Mommy said. "But this isn't something you should worry about." I couldn't sleep. I had so many questions. In Tita's stories about Nicaragua, she would always say, "When the people in charge tried to bully us and push us out, we got together and pushed back." I wondered if there was anything I could do. At breakfast, Tita and Mommy argued about the notice. Tita wanted to talk to the landlord's company about the rent, but Mommy seemed nervous. "We have to do something." I was shocked by how loud my voice sounded. "Yes," Tita said, "I agree, but your Mommy is scared." "We're not here to make trouble," Mommy said. Tita and I went to an organization that helps out tenants like us. "Our building is full of families who have lived there for a long time," Tita explained to the organizer. She had some of the coolest hair I'd ever seen. "This isn't just happening to you," she said. "This company owns a bunch of buildings in the neighborhood, and they're trying to kick out a lot of people. You need to get your neighbors together," the organizer said, "and fight as a group." I began to imagine us all as superheroes. The organizer handed us a poster for a tenants meeting at City Hall later that week. "Tita, this is how we can get everyone together," I said. Tita smiled. "That's the spirit, Allie." Back home, Mommy didn't want to hear about it. The next day, Tita and I knocked on our neighbors' doors and handed out flyers I'd drawn for the meeting. Some neighbors seemed nervous or even scared. When we knocked on Julian's door, I handed him a flyer while his dad watched quietly. "The company has done this before," I said. They raise the rent so tenants have to move, or they kick them out. Then they sell the building for a lot of money. But we can fight this if we go to the meeting. So, will you speak at the meeting, I asked? Julian's dad cleared his throat. We will, if you do. Me? I'm only 9. Tita chimed in, you're never too young to speak up. When we got to the city hall, I was nervous. All our neighbors were there and they were fired up. I heard my name and it was my turn to speak. My face looked like a bright red tomato as I walked to the microphone. Then I noticed Mommy in the crowd. I forgot what I wanted to say, so I held my drawing up of the neighborhood. My name is Alejandria, and I was born right here in Parkwood. I want to show you that our home is not just our apartment, but our whole neighborhood. Mommy, Tita, Julian, Miss Beatrice, Mr. Amir, Miss Alicia, Duende, we're like a big family, and we want to stay here, like my Tita says. Everyone should have a place to call home, no matter how much money they have. I hope you can make a law about that. I think that's what this is about. As I finished my story, Edgar stares at me, shaking his head. I can't believe you spoke at City Hall, Allie. You're like famous. Thanks, I say with a smile. Come on, let's go. Where to, Edgar asks. The neighborhood potluck. It's our new tradition. At the potluck, Tita shouts to get our attention. We have a special guest. Councilperson Brown is here. He speaks in a serious voice. I want to thank you all for participating in the meeting. Suddenly, he looked straight at me. We were especially impressed by our youngest speaker ever, Alejandria. People started clapping, and I could feel my face burning up. Mr. Brown continues. I came here to tell you personally that we're working on new rent rules to protect tenants like you, not just in this neighborhood, but across the city, so that everyone can stay in their homes. We all cheer. I hear Mommy's voice behind me. Gracias, daughter, she says. What for, Mommy? For showing me that if we speak up, we can change things. And I think we're singing out our children this morning.
I invite Thomas Jones to come up with our first of our sermonettes, and Monica Bennett, who will read the sermonette prepared by team member Paula Bourner, who couldn't be here.
Good morning. My name is Tom Jones. My pronouns are he, him. I have an interest in repurposing older buildings and different types of housing. I have repurposed a century home, a feed mill, 2 portable schoolrooms, and was successful in securing a permit to build 4 homes on a lot zoned for 1 single-family home. I have also been a municipal councillor in a small community outside of Peterborough, Ontario. When I saw an advertisement for a meeting of the UU Affordable Housing Team, I decided that it might be an opportunity to advocate for those individuals living in encampments. What drew me to want to work on housing affordability was what I saw in the past 6 years when we traveled from our home in Burlington to Hamilton. We had the opportunity to meet Tim, who stood outside the entry of Theatre Aquarius with a Tim Hortons cup in his hand. We and our friends always stopped to talk to him and gave him some money and sometimes clothes. We were thrilled when he asked us for a hug. He indicated that he was homeless, but his friend gave him permission to sleep in a stairwell. Recently, during one of our visits, he told us he finally had his own place. However, Tim has not been at his usual outside the theater recently, and we have no way of knowing where he might be. On our drives to Theatre Aquarius, we have witnessed one individual living on York Boulevard under a bench in his tent with all his belongings surrounding the site. Recently, we have noticed a young man who set up camp at the intersection of King and Dundurn on the median, and we have noticed more and more encampments at various locations in the city. Courts have ruled local governments must comply with Section 7 of the Charter before clearing tents and encampments, and must provide enough accessible shelter beds for those who are unhoused. The mayor used her mayoral powers to initiate the funding of additional shelter space, building tiny homes and supporting Hamilton Alliance for Tiny Shelters in their attempts to find suitable location to provide temporary supportive housing. Council approved an $18.3 million plan to temporarily boost the shelter system with 192 indoor spaces and 40 micro shelters for 80 people without a home, which the city has prioritized for couples and those with pets, and offer a range of services including washrooms, showers, laundry, food, as well as 24/7 staffing. Hamilton plans to put $5.2 million in federal encampment response funding towards its effort to open more shelter spaces this winter. In recognition of National Housing Day, the mayor of Hamilton has confirmed that the temporary shelter on Tiffany Street will open next month on Friday, December the 20th. I would ask that each of you consider supporting any of those groups that are advocating for the construction of deeply affordable supportive housing. Thank you.
So you're hearing my voice, but you are actually listening to Paula Bourner's words. When my son was a young man, for many reasons, he found himself wandering the streets of Toronto, under or unemployed, homeless, and addicted to alcohol and drugs. It was the worst time of his life. He has told me how he deliberately used uppers like crack cocaine or crystal meth to keep himself awake because he had no place to sleep. Then, after several days, he would check himself into a detox center to come down, eat, and sleep until his addictions drove him back to the streets. Over a number of years, Jason was able, with family and medical support, as well as sheer determination, to work his way back to a place where he became a contributing member of society as a peer support worker, helping others currently dealing with the same kinds of issues which had hurt him in the past. During part of his recovery, my son lived in Toronto community housing, where I sometimes visited him. It was a scary place, often visited by police, where drug dealers abounded. To get this apartment, Jason had called them virtually every day for 6 years, part of his sheer determinism, as referenced above. But while he lived there, he was violently threatened on a number of occasions, threats often more vicious due to the fact that Jason is a member of the LGBT community. For all of those reasons, as he continued his recovery work, I helped him find a place close to downtown where he was now working. I help him out with rent because I can afford to, and he can feel safe at last. I'm very proud of the work my son is doing now, helping clients to navigate medical and governmental systems to get the help they need. But I can't help thinking how much easier it is to access services when you have a place to live, and how even that can be precarious if your housing isn't safe or well managed, as Jason experienced. When the housing team started here at the church, I joined it in particular because of what I knew about housing issues for those who have so many roadblocks to a successful way of life. Yes, many of the people living in tents around the city are drug users who may be currently unemployable, but with good supports, including housing, many of them could be enabled to turn their lives around. I know this is true. I've seen it.
The offering each week recognizes that the many ministries of this church are sustained by the generosity of its members, whether through annual pledging or donations in the offering basket. We will now receive an offering as we listen to our music minister. Your gifts in support of our ministries are much appreciated. Thank you. And I now call on Joan MacNeil of the housing team to deliver her sermonette.
Is this about right? Okay. Okay. This is a moment that's both harsh and hopeful. It's harsh because we're beginning as a congregation to become aware of the magnitude and depth of the housing problem here and its impact on middle and low-income people. But it's also a hopeful moment because correctly identifying the root causes of that problem enables us to identify genuine solutions and create a better future. The housing problem is a central ethical challenge, I believe, for faith groups. We can't really afford to sit on the sidelines or try to play a neutral bridge builder or honest broker, nor should we, given the magnitude of the suffering that high rents, rent evictions, and evictions, and the lack of decent, affordable housing options are causing tenants. Our ethical obligations are clear. The needs of renters must take priority over landlords' desire to maximize profits, be the landlords corporations or mom-and-pop operations. Small is not always beautiful. Like large corporate landlords, many small-time landlords don't hesitate to charge whatever the market will bear, nor to imply that wringing less than that out of tenants is tantamount to subsidizing tenants. Until recently, landlords tried to hang on to well-behaved tenants willing to contribute to the carrying costs of the building. However, now that vacancy decontrol makes it possible to hike rents by any amount between tenants, there's a powerful incentive for landlords to evict long-time, well-behaved tenants fully up to date on their rent so that they can hike the rent and up the profits. Overall, we should never lose sight of the fact that land belongs to us collectively. It's finite, and the common good must determine its use and control. The percentage of an average household income that used to be sufficient to carry the mortgage on a detached two-story home with multiple bedrooms is now only enough to rent a one-bedroom apartment. No amount of frugality and planning will overcome those numbers. High rents, rent evictions, demevictions, and insecurity of tenure in rental housing are direct threats to the physical and mental health of renters, who are about half the population in large urban centers now. The constant insecurity and drain on their finances provokes anxiety and stress inexorably. So does having to put other basic expenses on a credit card to free up one's wages for rent. Affluent people often assume that running up credit card debts are, that people running up credit card debts are unwilling to live within their means. However, what is the alternative when there are no rental units within one's means? Pitching a tent in a park, lining up at a shelter, or couch surfing endlessly. Moreover, high rents and rent evictions oblige many young people to leave the communities in which they grew up. Is it healthy for young people, for young children, for example, to barely know their grandparents, aunts, uncles, and cousins? Is it healthy for seniors to be left behind? High rents, rent evictions, and the like also damage our physical health. The human body is quite capable of dealing with short episodes of mild stress, a few hours here and there. However, ongoing extreme stress, month after month, year after year, overwhelms our body's coping mechanisms. Unrelenting stress leads to the release of an enzyme, the COX-2 enzyme, which triggers chronic inflammation throughout the body, and that ups our risk of cancer, arthritis, and Alzheimer's disease. Ensuring access to decent, affordable housing is also a precondition, I believe, to making headway on solving most of the other issues confronting us as a society. Simply put, people who are worried about being unable to keep a roof over their own heads or their children's heads and food on the table will be unable to focus much on learning about key issues, let alone participate in shaping the solutions. When rent chews up 60 or 80% of an average renter's income, surviving demands that they either work inordinately long hours, 60 to 80 hours a week. I met 4 people doing that 2 weeks ago, or spend time in lineups at food banks and soup kitchens. Housing instability leads to many renters not being on voters' lists, and then they are denied the right to vote on election day. Median and low-income renters and homeowners, stretched to the max, know that they are not a priority for most politicians. We should not be surprised if this makes some vulnerable to the lure of illiberal demagogues who proclaim, "I hear you, I have a simple solution." The supreme irony is that many of the people whose work makes our society, our city, healthier, safer, and more richly human, supermarket cashiers, hospital workers, PSWs, long-term care facility workers, childcare workers, registered massage therapists, nursing assistants, cultural workers, addiction counselors, to name just a few, are under considerable economic stress trying to keep up with rents. As reported in a Hamilton Spectator article, one-bedroom units in our city cost $1,751 in October, just a couple months ago. Let's compare that with what the working people who keep this city ticking can afford. Supermarket cashiers can afford a rent of no more than $894 a month. A typical registered massage therapist can only afford $918 a month. Early childhood educators can afford $1,067. Medical lab technicians can only afford $1,350. And addiction counselors can only afford $1,524 a month. So homes, and a decent apartment can be a perfectly good home, are like water. We cannot do without homes any more than we can do without water. Therefore, I think our challenge is this: let's have the courage and the sense of social solidarity to press for a transition to a housing model in which nonprofit rents set the pace, rather than continuing to let for-profit rents and housing prices set the pace, because that leaves so many working people and retirees unable to afford to keep even a modest home over their heads. This is, I believe, the ethical challenge of our community at this time.
We now enter a time of meditation and contemplation. I invite you to relax, close your eyes if you like, and take a deep breath. Following our reading, there will be a few moments of silence, followed by music. And during the music, you're invited to come up and light a candle for a joy or a concern. In this community, we commit to accepting each other for who we are, for however we identify, for whatever we bring to this place at any given time. At any given time, some of us are grieving or in pain, and some of us are walking on air with good news. Some of us will be eager for action, and some of us eager for a time and place of rest. Some of us eager for company, and some of us happy to just slip out when the service is over. What we have in common is our showing up and the feeling that it matters to be here now, that we belong here, are accepted here in all the ways that we show up. May we feel blessed to be here and by the presence of all who are here. Part of building a community in which we nurture each other includes sharing our joys and our sorrows. And today we have just one, a sorrow from Walter Clement. Walter says that he has lost another friend. Her name was Joan. She lived in his building at First Place, and we all miss her. We are with you, Walter, in your grief and your sorrow. There are also joys among us, and we celebrate those joys and rejoice in the happiness that flows through this community. And now it's my sermonette. I approach the housing issue from a very different place than the stories you've just heard and the story you heard from Jenny after this. I come from a place of good fortune and privilege. I have never had to stress over paying rent or mortgage. I've been a homeowner since the 1980s, with the purchase of my first home aided by government incentives for first-time home buyers. I've never heard of a government incentive for first-time renters. Just noting. I don't say any of this out of guilt. I just want to note that I didn't earn my good fortune. I didn't work harder than anybody else. I was just lucky. And our housing policies and systems are set up to work really well for people like me who are moderately well off, and not so well for a significant and growing group of others, including renters. I like what I have, a safe, secure, appropriate, comfortable home that I can afford. And I know that everything good that's happened to me, good education, good jobs, good health, is built on the foundation of that good, affordable housing that I've had. And I don't want to be in a situation where that's something exclusive, something difficult to obtain. I want everyone to be able to have the good things that I've had. That's what drives me. And absent that kind of home base, everything is a struggle. We've heard a few of those stories. We'll hear one more. And there are literally millions of those stories in Canada. Joan has made the moral case for action on the housing crisis, but there's a very practical case, even if you don't care about the situation that millions of Canadians find themselves in. With millions of households overspending on their housing, and with investors overinvesting in housing, our whole economy is weakened and less productive. We hear a lot about a housing or a productivity crisis, and much of that is driven by the very high amount of money that goes into our housing system. And the housing crisis is also fueling anger that's playing out politically in ways that I suspect many of us won't like. So there's no safe sideline in the housing crisis. We're all affected by it, although hardly equally. I think the city of Hamilton is broadly doing a number of good things, finally. But the federal and provincial governments have both the wrong focus and are not investing at anything like the scale that the crisis requires. First, we need to stop the losses of affordable units. In Hamilton, we lose something like 23 units of affordable housing in both the non-market and market sectors. 23 units for every unit we build. So picture a bucket where a dribble's coming in the top and 23 leaks are going out the bottom. So clearly we need to fix the rent rules that are mainly driving that. And then both the federal and provincial governments are and have always been primarily focused on the private market and primarily focused on privileging home ownership, when the real need with the affordability and homeless crises are for a permanent funding program for something like 50 to 100,000 units of non-market and co-op housing every year, because there are that many people who can't afford market housing. Things will only change when we grow and organize a large movement of both homeowners and renters, large enough and persistent enough to force better approaches. That will take time, and then the solutions themselves will take years to roll out. Indeed, it just needs to be a permanent process of rolling out new units. And we need to be able to somehow sustain those efforts in the congregation and elsewhere. For me, the work on affordable housing isn't work that must be done. It's not something I'm doing out of a sense of duty. For one thing, it's a fascinating subject, but more importantly, it's both inspiring and frankly fun to work alongside people committed to housing justice. We're very clear about what the reality is and yet focus on possibilities and never give up. They aren't superheroes, despite the story that Pat read. They get upset and angry, but they find a way to carry on. Of course, those actually struggling with soaring rents or fear of eviction or who are experiencing homelessness don't really have the luxury of being able to give up on this fight in frustration, as I could. If I give up, I still go home at night. If others give up, they might not have a home to go to. Unitarian theologian Sharon Welch has noted, it's easier to give up on long-term social change when one is comfortable in the present. We can't control the outcomes of our efforts, but to be in it for the long term, we need the struggle itself to be rewarding. We need fulfillment in the effort and in the relationships with those we work with. And we need things like humor and shared meals and downtime. And if, frankly, working on housing or with one particular group doesn't work for you, find another issue or another group that does. Because all of these issues of inequality and oppression and injustice are all connected anyway. The cynics will say nothing will change. And if we believe them, they're right. But others, like progressive historian Howard Zinn, have pointed out to situation after situation in history when popular pressure, seemingly getting nowhere, suddenly leads to shifts in the right direction. We just never know when our efforts might tip the balance. Sharon Welch, who I quoted earlier, sees the divine as a quality of the rich relationships of people working together for justice. And Howard Zinn tells us the reward for participating in a movement for social justice is not the prospect of future victory. It's the exhilaration of standing together with other people, taking risks together, enjoying small triumphs, and enduring disheartening setbacks together. Only that is sustainable. I now invite Jennie Koops to come up and read our final sermonette.
Hello, my name is Jennie. My pronouns are she, her, and I've come to this church a couple of times over the last couple of months, but my story is that since the pandemic, my daughter and I have moved in with one family member and then another until I finally was able to get my own place because I finished my master's degree and was able to get a full-time job. However, this job, though it's a professional job, I work in the mental health field, it only allowed me to get a one-bedroom apartment. And so my daughter is in grade 2. So she needs her own space, but I'm not comfortable paying more than half of my monthly earnings for a bigger space because what if I lose my job? That's something that really, really scares me about this whole housing situation, and it's a big part of the reason why I joined the Housing Advocacy Committee here. So full-time work is supposed to be the answer, and that's the answer that I was told was going to solve my housing problems, but that's not my reality today. This lifeline feels more like a precarious tightrope than anything else right now. And in my line of work, I've also heard so many different stories of how the housing unaffordability crisis impacts them. So people who are homeless, to people who are precariously housed, to people who have stable housing. And one thing I've learned is that it's so difficult for people to be able to work through their emotional wounds and heal from all of their stuff that they struggle with when their basic needs are, excuse me, they're not either not being met or they're on such a precarious foundation. And I'm sure many of you have heard of Maslow's hierarchy of needs, and he's learned that from the Blackfoot tribe as well. So that idea is that the bottom layer, one of the most important needs that we have is housing and food and safety. And if you can't meet that housing need, then you can't get to the other levels of other needs that you have, like self-love and community and self-esteem and all of those things that make a fulfilling and thriving life. But let's zoom out for a moment to the bigger picture, because the housing and affordability crisis impacts us so much more than our own personal ability to reach self-actualization. And the housing and affordability crisis really does impact our community and our need for community as well. When people are priced out of neighborhoods, we lose more than our homes. We lose informal support networks that help single parents like me be able to manage, like having a neighborhood where my daughter can go outside and play with kids her age, or even just having a school that my daughter has been at for years, and the staff there know our story and know our family and can support us in better ways than if we're moving from school to school to school. It's also important because you never know when you're going to fall on hard times. You may be privileged or not, but even if you are privileged, like anything could happen and you can lose, especially in this economy. And we can talk about resiliency, and we can talk about how we can survive in hard situations, and we can talk about how children are tough and then can make it through challenging events. But my question is, why do we need it to be so hard for us to make it through these situations? I can do what I can to shield my daughter from the stress that I feel about our housing situation, but she notices my stresses, and all kids notice all of our stresses, no matter what we do. So really, this is why I've joined the housing advocacy team. It's not just for me and my daughter, but it's for everybody, because it's more than me who needs housing. It's more than people who are unhoused who need community. We all need community. We all need to be able to lift each other up so that we can have less to struggle with. And when we have less to struggle with, we can also work on healing our emotional wounds and just raise the level for everybody and create a better world for the next 7 generations.
Please stand if you are willing and able to sing our final hymn. Apparently I have something on my mind. Our final hymn is called Building a New Way. People want to sing, they're going to sing. We're going to close our ceremony with a little bit of close our service with a little bit of a ceremony. I take great delight in, and I want to invite the housing team to come up because it's not me, it's us. Tom, yeah. Tom, Jenny, and Joan. We're going to honor somebody who's not only very successful in housing people in need, but someone I admire and enjoy, Melanee McAulay of Sacajawea. And it tells me something really important that when I mentioned to the current executive director, Miranda Rapazzo, that we were doing this, she said, "Oh, well, we got to come." And so just about the whole staff, no, it's not a big staff, but just about the whole staff of Sacajawea here. And I want to introduce you folks, because I get to interact with them often. But Miranda Rapazzo, please stand. Miranda is the new executive director. Lisa Potroff is the case manager. And Faith Johnson looks after the buildings. So most of you will know that this congregation has supported, through fundraising and other activities, Sacajawea since 2016. Many of you may not know how that started. When the Affordable Housing Team began meeting in about April 2016, we spent some months talking about what we might do, and one of the things we talked about was, might there be an affordable housing provider that we could support, either through volunteering or fundraising? And we talked to a number of them. Most of them are fairly large. And then I went to a city planning meeting in May of 2016 and first heard of a little organization called Sacajawea. They were there to talk about plans to tear down an old church manse at 18 West Avenue South and build an apartment building. They were then talking about 16 units. When they finally built it, it was 23. And I learned that Beth Gray, who is a former member of this congregation, not only knew about Sacajawea, she was actually working with them on this project. So we talked, and she said Sacajawea was financially solid, it was responsible, it was well governed, it was well run. It had an all-Indigenous board and staff, and its intention was to be led by Indigenous people, supporting Indigenous people. So, encouraged, I contacted Melanee McAulay, the executive director, to talk about the possibility that we could somehow support them. In late August that year, Melanee, Beth, Jennifer Kay, Paula Bourner, and I met, and after Beth did a smudging, Melanee described Sacajawea and their current project. At the time, they had just over 24 housing units, so building a 16 or 23 unit apartment building was a rather significant project. And they had funding for the housing units, but not for the amenities in the building. And that included their hope that they would have a cultural room in that building. Sacajawea had never had a place where its tenants could gather to relax or for education or for ceremony. And they could use some help fundraising for that, to equip it, to build it, and to furnish it. Melanee was clear, and so were we, that the church didn't want any role in their decision-making. What we were offering was to help meet needs that Sacajawea identified, and then to let the relationship evolve over time. We might attend each other's events, but we would raise money for that culture room. We never promised we would cover the cost. We would try. So our church had been doing some work on truth and reconciliation at that point, so working with Sacajawea was a good fit. There are just 2 Indigenous housing providers in the city. And we knew that whatever we donated would make a bigger impact with a small organization than it might with some of the larger ones. So the housing team approved that approach, and we donated the annual Christmas Eve collection that year to Sacajawea. We've done that every year since, and we've had some other fundraisers. To our delight, we have watched Sacajawea grow so that it now has about 3 times the number of units it had in 2016, with new buildings on Robert Street and Stephen Street. We've donated something over $70,000, not just for the culture room, but for furnishings and other buildings, kitchen appliances in their new building, gifts for tenants, other things. But the best thing is we built a relationship. Sacajawea, I said it was small. It's got a membership of about 20 people, most of whom have served at one time or another on the board. They're all Indigenous women. They've invited me to annual meetings. I'm typically the only man. And a number of us from the church have attended the building openings or tours, and Melanee and others from Sacajawea have attended events at our church. Singers from Sacajawea performed at one of our fall festivals, and when the Canadian Unitarian Council held its annual meeting here in Hamilton in 2018, again, singers from Sacajawea participated in the worship service there. The women of Sacajawea are a lot of fun. They laugh hard and often, and they also work hard and well. Melanee began with Sacajawea in March of 1993, so that was less than 6 years after it was founded. She's led it through various expansion plans to get where they are today and left them with plans for the future that will see 2 even more ambitious projects, 40 units on Gage Avenue North, and just over here on a little property that you'll have trouble imagining as housing. It's right by the park. They're going to build 10 units of student housing. And I really admire this. Melanee really planned her succession brilliantly. She brought Miranda onto the staff 5 years ago, and Miranda is now the executive director. So I love a story told by Brian Sibley. He's the executive director of Kiwanis Homes. He leads an organization that up till recently had 1,000 units of housing. And they had stopped building in the 1990s when the federal government stopped funding housing. And he said when he saw Melanee and Sacajawea building, little building after little building, he said they felt shamed, his word, into developing their own expansion plan. And that expansion plan calls for 1,000 units, new units of affordable housing by 2028. I think that's a wonderful example of leading by example. Melanee was a valued member of the Hamilton Executive Directors Aboriginal Coalition, which is HEDAC, which was sometimes pronounced headache. And it's now called the Coalition of Hamilton Indigenous Leadership, which is pronounced chill, I guess. Anyway. When the Canadian Alliance to End Homelessness met in Hamilton in 2018, Melanee was awarded one of 3 awards for local Indigenous lifetime achievement in eliminating homelessness. And this year, Melanee was speaker at Canada Mortgage and Housing's annual National Housing Conference. She was one of the thought leaders, industry experts, or innovators. I think she probably fits all 3. And she has been part of many other organizations, initiatives, and boards, and I think she serves on 2 boards now. With the opening of the truly beautiful Stephen Street apartments, and somewhere in there you will see them. You can tell it's the ones with the really gorgeous, shiny floors. Yeah, not these, although that's gorgeous too. With the opening of that apartment, Melanee stepped down from Sacajawea after more than 31 years of her leadership. She was duly celebrated at the subsequent annual meeting of Sacajawea and at the formal opening of the Stephen Street building. And, you know, Melanee and her staff and the board members have made members of our church feel really, really part of their success. And it is my great pleasure to call Melanee to our podium to receive a couple of gifts from the housing team in appreciation of her warmth and friendship and her tremendous contribution to creating affordable homes for Indigenous people in this city.
Thank you so much. But if you remember way back, I was so nervous to speak here, and Bill can attest for that. But you know what? You have touched on the truth and reconciliation, you know, with the housing and that. But you've lifted Sacajawea up so much that we couldn't do in a lot of runs. But with the next 50 units that are coming, oh, I'm just so happy. Because the 40 that's going to be there, it's going to be wraparound services, you know, and getting them right off the street, our brothers and sisters. And the other one's for the students that want to continue and have a safe place to stay as they get educated. And as Bill said, I'm on a couple of boards, but no, I'm only on one now. I'm on the St. Matthew's House, and that's with the 412, and that's with the 15 units. 8 are Indigenous, and the other 7 are for Blacks, right? So this is a really good thing. And now that I'm a senior, and this will be a senior, 55 plus, they wanted me to sit on the board and give some expertise, I guess. But I'm there, and I love it. So, and it's on the 6th floor now. It's a 6th floor building, and it's just finished the 5th floor. So this will be great. Thank you so much.
We close our service with these words from Gary Kowalski. Gathered in our various faiths, we give thanks for the blessings of world community as we share our common dream. Homes and schools where children thrive, neighborhoods that are safe and clean, a city rich in colors and cultures, an economy where no one is expendable, a beloved community where rich and poor alike have access to the opportunity for a dignified and productive life, churches, mosques, synagogues, and temples where our deepest hope is to be of service to a hurting world. Enable us as we leave this place to carry forth this prayer into the coming week, turning our thoughts towards charity, our hearts towards justice, and our hands towards the work of peace. Shalom and amen. Please stay seated for the postlude, and then I encourage you to grab a coffee and join us back here for a conversation with the housing team. Postlude.
I'll start by saying I'm not a singer, but when I was thinking about the music to support today's theme, the idea of need and people providing need is what came to me, and I couldn't choose anything else but this old song. So if you happen to know it, which I think many of you might, you can all help me out.